We're going to run program ROWOPS to try and find the inverse of this matrix. We've already kind of doubled the size, so we can use that program. Let me get that started. Program ROWOPS. Select matrix A. Good. Now, personally, my first step is going to be to swap the first and third rows because I want to put a 1 up here where that 2 is. It's called a pivot. And it's going to make my life a little bit easier, so I'm going to swap row 1 with row 3. There we go. And now the convenience of that is I can use that pivot to get a 0 here and here. 0 where these two are. So we'll add row 1 to row 2. So I'll just do a row add. So it's row 1 to row 2. And that puts a 0 there, which is what I expect. Now I need to get a 0 where the 2 is. So that's a multiply row add. Let's do that. Multiply row 1 by -2, add it to row 2. Whoops. Oh, crap. Let's see. Well, this is actually kind of good. This is what you can do when you screw up. You can kind of reverse it. So I'm going to multiply row add row 1 by 2, and then make that a 0. All right, so you can kind of recover from certain mistakes. So let's continue. Oh, come on. There we go. Multiply row add, multiply row 1 by 2, add it to row 2. There we go. Now let's continue. Let's see if we can't get this right this time. Multiply row add, row 1 by -2, add to row 3. That's looking a little bit better. Now, notice how convenient it was to have a 1 here, correct? It'd be really convenient to have a 1 here. And I can see an easy way to get that. If I add this row to this row, that puts a 1 there in that pivot. So let's do that. I'm going to add row 3 to row 2. So I'll select the second one, add row 3 to row 2, and beautiful. That puts a 1 there, and that's going to make my life a lot easier. I'm next going to get a 0 right here. So you're going to add 4 times row 2 to row 3. So multiply row add, that's the fourth one down again. Multiply row 2 by 4, add it to row 3. Beautiful. Looking pretty good. In fact, there's really only one step left, right? Do you see what that one last step is? Yeah, get the 4 up here to be a 0. So multiply row add again. So 4, multiply row 2 by what? -4, add it to row 1. Beautiful. So that should be our inverse matrix. And then you can just check that with the inverse key on your calculator as well. So it's helpful to have 1s here. I mean, sometimes that creates fractions, though. So, it's a little bit of an art. But I do promise that, the ones I give you are going to be pretty simple, like 4 or 5 steps. And, that one step where I added row 3 to row 2 to put a 1 there, that's a little tricky. I mean, that's something that comes from experience. So it's not something that I'm going to expect that you guys master right away on a test. So, yeah, expect something a little bit more straightforward than that. All right. But you're good now?